Ground control. I've got multiple warnings. Hydraulics, avionics, structural. Christopher Hawley's voice crackled through the static, calm despite the chaos erupting around him at 85. 0 feet. The birds coming apart. Initiating emergency descent protocol. For 17 seconds, there was only static. Then came the sound that would haunt Mission Control forever, metal screaming against impossible forces, alarms shrieking in cascading failure, and Hawley's breathing, rapid but controlled. X2 Alpha, eject. Eject now. Flight Director Sarah Morgan's voice broke through professional composure. But at Mach 6.7, ejection meant certain death. Negative control, still fighting for. A deafening crack cut through the transmission. Starboard wing separation. I've lost. The altimeter readings on ground control screens plummeted impossibly fast. 85, 0 feet. 73, 0, 61, 0. In the observation room, Breakpoint Aerospace executives watched their $5 billion prototype disintegrate on radar. Engineers who'd warned about the thermal protection system stood frozen. Families invited to witness history, instead witnessed tragedy. Tell Linda. Hawley's final transmission lasted 1.3 seconds before the X-2's titanium frame buckled under forces no human body could survive. The experimental hypersonic aircraft scattered across 200 miles of Nevada desert, taking with it the man who'd spent his life dancing with death and finally lost. March 14, Groom Lake Test Facility. Christopher Hawley, 49 years old, test pilot extraordinaire, 0 flight hours. 47 experimental aircraft, 0 margin for error. But the X-2 wasn't just another experimental aircraft, it was an impossibility made real, a hypersonic demon that demanded perfection from imperfect systems. And on that crystalline morning, perfection failed. In 47 seconds, the aviation world lost its most talented test pilot. But the story of Christopher Hawley's death began long before he strapped into the X-2's cockpit. It began with ambition, pressure, and a systematic betrayal of every safety protocol meant to protect the people who push humanity's boundaries. You're watching Disasters Decoded. If this story grips you, subscribe, like, and share, because what you're about to discover should never have been classified. Christopher Hawley wasn't born to fly, he was forged for it. Standing at mission briefings with eyes that had seen the curvature of Earth more times than most astronauts, Hawley possessed something rarer than skill, an intuitive understanding of aircraft psychology. Machines spoke to him in vibrations, pressure changes, and sounds others couldn't detect. For 22 years, Hawley had been the tip of aviation's spear. Air Force Academy graduate, F-22 Raptor pilot, 3 combat tours, then the invitation that changed everything, Edwards Air Force Base Test Pilot School. By 35, he was flying aircraft that existed only in classified documents. By 40, aerospace contractors competed for his services with 7-figure contracts. Chris didn't just fly aircraft, he merged with them, recalled Marcus Webb, fellow test pilot. He'd spend hours in simulators after everyone left, not practicing maneuvers, but learning the aircraft's personality. He said every plane had a soul, and you had to respect it. But respect and recklessness often flew close formation in Hawley's career. The industry whispered about his exploits, pushing the X-15B to Mach 5.3 when protocols demanded 4.8, recovering from an inverted flat spin in the classified Aurora prototype when engineers said recovery was impossible, landing the damaged GT-7 with half its control surfaces missing. His wife Linda understood the contradiction. Christopher believed his relationship with aircraft made him safer. She later testified. He thought understanding them deeply meant they'd never betray him. But machines don't have loyalty. The transformation began in 2019 when Breakpoint Aerospace recruited Hawley for Project X2. The money was extraordinary, $3.2 million annually plus performance bonuses, but money never motivated Hawley. The X2 represented something more. the chance to pilot humanity's fastest aircraft, to literally outrun sound by factors previously impossible. Colleagues noticed changes. Hawley's legendary meticulousness became obsessive. He'd spend 18-hour days reviewing telemetry data, questioning engineers about microscopic design decisions, running scenarios that pushed into theoretical impossibilities. Test pilot James Patterson found him at 3 a.m. studying thermal dynamics equations. I asked if everything was okay, Patterson remembered. Chris just looked at me and said, "The X2 doesn't forgive. One mistake at Mach 7, and physics becomes your executioner." I'd never heard him talk about an aircraft with fear before. The fear was justified. Hawley had survived 31 emergency situations in experimental aircraft, but the X2 operated in a realm where traditional pilot skills meant nothing. At hypersonic speeds, human reaction time becomes irrelevant. By the time a pilot recognizes a problem, they're already dead, the aircraft just hasn't told them yet. Medical evaluations from Hawley's final months revealed concerning patterns: elevated cortisol levels, disrupted sleep cycles, weight loss. Flight surgeon Dr. Amanda Chen recommended a 2-week stand down. Breakpoint Aerospace overruled her, citing critical testing windows and congressional budget reviews. The company treated Chris like equipment, Dr. Chen stated in depositions. Expensive equipment, but equipment nonetheless. They pushed him past human limits because the X2 program couldn't afford delays. Hawley's personal logs, recovered from his home office, painted a darker picture. Entries described recurring nightmares about losing control at altitude, concerns about unexplained vibrations during test flights, and growing certainty that the X2's scramjet engine contained fundamental design flaws. February 28 entry: the harmonics are wrong. Engineering says it's within tolerance, but tolerance at Mach 2 and tolerance at Mach 7 are different universes. The bird wants to tear itself apart. I can feel it fighting against its own existence. March 7 entry: Linda asked why I'm not sleeping. How do I explain that I'm flying a suicide machine held together by arrogance and composite materials? But if I don't fly it, they'll give it to someone with less experience, someone who won't feel the warnings. Former Breakpoint engineer David Kim confirmed Hawley's intuitions. Chris was right about the harmonics. We'd detected resonance patterns that concerned us, but management buried our reports. They said we were being overly conservative, that Hawley's skills would compensate for any minor instabilities. The night before his final flight, Hawley called his mentor, legendary test pilot Chuck Morgan. They talked for 2 hours about aircraft, family, and legacy. Morgan sensed something different. Chris asked me if I ever felt like I was racing against myself, Morgan recalled. He said every flight felt like Russian roulette, but walking away meant someone else would pull the trigger. I told him no aircraft was worth dying for. He just said, "Someone has to push the envelope, Chuck, otherwise we never advance." Hawley spent his last evening with Linda and their 2 teenage daughters. They watched movies, played board games, normal family activities that felt desperately important. At midnight, unable to sleep, Hawley wrote one final log entry. Tomorrow's flight feels different. The X2 has been patient, but patience isn't forgiveness. If something happens, know that I understood the risks. I chose this. But God help me. I can't let her fly angry. The next morning, Christopher Hawley arrived at Groom Lake at 500 hours. He was dead by 947. The X2 wasn't born. It was summoned from the fevered dreams of aerospace engineers who believed physics was negotiable. Officially designated the Experimental Hypersonic Vehicle 2, the aircraft represented $5 billion of taxpayer money funneled through black budgets into Breakpoint Aerospace's promise to deliver America's first operational Mach 7 Plus aircraft. At first glance, X2 looked like death incarnate. 68 feet of carbon composite and titanium shaped into angles that seemed to mock traditional aerodynamics. Its scramjet engine, revolutionary in design, promised to breathe air at speeds where air becomes plasma. The thermal protection system, borrowed from classified space programs, theoretically could withstand 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Theoretically. The X-2 was an exercise in engineering hubris, explained Dr. Robert Thorne, former NASA propulsion specialist. We were operating at the absolute edge of materials science, computer modeling, and human understanding. Every flight was an experiment in controlled catastrophe. The problems began during ground testing. The scramjet engine, designed by Breakpoint's propulsion division, generated unexpected resonance frequencies at specific thrust levels. During Test Series Alpha, 3 engine assemblies destroyed themselves on test stands. Engineers identified harmonic oscillations that created microfractures in the combustion chamber walls. The solution? Breakpoint didn't solve it, they managed it. Software limiters prevented the engine from operating in resonance zones, but atmospheric conditions at altitude were unpredictable. What worked at sea level became lethal at 0 feet. Internal documents revealed a cascade of compromises. The airframe's composite materials, manufactured by the lowest bidder, showed stress fatigue 40% faster than specifications demanded. Heat shield tiles, identical to those that failed on Columbia, were approved despite known vulnerabilities. The flight control system, entirely computer-dependent above Mach 4, had redundancies, but all redundancies shared common failure points. Test pilot Rebecca Martinez flew X-2's early flights and refused to continue after Flight 7. "The aircraft wanted to kill you," she testified, "not maliciously structurally. It vibrated wrong, controls would freeze for microseconds, the engine would hiccup at transition speeds. I told Breakpoint the X-2 needed fundamental redesign. They replaced me. The aerodynamics created unique dangers. At hypersonic speeds, air doesn't flow, it explodes around surfaces. The X-2's sharp edges, necessary for speed, created shock waves that interacted unpredictably. Computer simulations suggested these interactions were manageable. Reality disagreed." Dr. Helen Chang, Breakpoint's former chief safety engineer, documented 17 critical safety concerns. Her report, dated 6 months before Hawley's death, warned, "Catastrophic failure probability exceeds 1 in 15 flights. Recommend immediate suspension of manned testing pending systematic design review." Breakpoint's response was to transfer Dr. Chang to their commercial division and classify her report beyond standard personnel access. The test program accelerated. The X-2's predecessors had all failed spectacularly. The Zone Alpha disintegrated during unmanned testing. The Zone Beta's scramjet exploded on the ground, killing 2 technicians. The Zone Gamma achieved Mach 5.8 before its airframe buckled, the unmanned vehicle cartwheeling across the desert in pieces smaller than a briefcase. But political pressure made failure unacceptable. China had announced hypersonic bomber capabilities. Russia claimed operational hypersonic missiles. Congress demanded America maintain aerospace superiority. Breakpoint promised the X-2 would fly by March 2024 or lose their contract to Lockheed. So, they cut corners with surgical precision. Extended testing phases became abbreviated. Safety margins were recalculated using optimistic parameters. Critical systems marked for redundant backup were deemed acceptably reliable with single-point failure modes. The engine remained the primary concern. At Mach 6+, the scramjet operated in a regime where combustion itself became unstable. Fuel didn't burn it, exploded continuously, contained only by magnetic fields and ceramic chambers operating beyond their design limits. The engine literally consumed itself, regenerating through active cooling systems that worked until they didn't. Hawley understood these dangers intimately. His technical knowledge surpassed many engineers. He'd identified the harmonic resonance issue independently, calculating failure probabilities that matched Dr. Chang's suppressed report. But he also believed his skills could navigate the knife's edge between success and catastrophe. Christopher treated the X-2 like a dangerous animal that could be trained, observed test engineer Michael Roberts. He thought if he understood it completely, he could predict its betrayals. But physics doesn't respect expertise. The aircraft's computer systems added another layer of risk. 37 independent processors managed everything from engine performance to control surface micro-adjustments. Above Mach 4, human pilots became passengers. The computer flew while pilots monitored. But the software, rushed through development, contained known bugs deemed non-critical because they occurred rarely in simulations. The final design review before Hawley's fatal flight revealed the awful truth. The X-2 was unflyable by conventional standards. It existed in a perpetual state of barely controlled failure, demanding perfect conditions, perfect systems, and perfect luck. The review board recommended 6 months of additional unmanned testing. Breakpoint CEO Jonathan Morris overruled them with 5 words that would echo through congressional hearings. Hawley can handle the risk. But risk and certainty occupied different universes at hypersonic speeds. The X-2 didn't assess pilot skill, it calculated probability, and probability, unlike courage, didn't care about reputation. Breakpoint Aerospace began as a dream, revolutionizing aviation through aggressive innovation. By 2024, it had become a nightmare of financial desperation, ethical compromise, and institutional momentum that crushed anyone who suggested slowing down. The company's board of directors faced a simple equation: deliver the X-2 by March 31 or lose the $15 billion advanced hypersonic systems contract to competitors. With $3 billion already invested and stockholders demanding returns, failure meant bankruptcy. Success meant survival. Safety became a luxury they convinced themselves they couldn't afford. CEO Jonathan Morris, a former Wall Street executive with no aerospace experience, managed through spreadsheets and deadlines. His philosophy, engineering problems have engineering solutions, ignored the reality that some problems have no solutions, only catastrophes waiting to happen. Morris treated safety protocols like negotiable contract terms, testified former Vice President of Operations Sandra Park. He'd ask engineers to find creative interpretations of federal regulations. When we explained that physics doesn't negotiate, he'd remind us that neither did bankruptcy court. The culture inside Breakpoint transformed from innovation-focused to deadline-obsessed. Engineers who raised concerns were labeled progress obstacles. Safety meetings became box-checking exercises. Incident reports were edited to minimize severity, then buried in bureaucratic filing systems. Whistleblower Thomas Anderson, a senior systems engineer, documented the deterioration. We went from asking, "Is it safe?" to asking, "Can we defend this in court?" Every decision was filtered through legal liability rather than human life. We knew someone would die. We just hoped it wouldn't be traceable to specific decisions. Financial pressure created cascading compromises. When primary contractors failed to deliver components meeting specifications, Breakpoint accepted substandard parts rather than delay schedules. When testing revealed problems, they reclassified failures as anomalies requiring monitoring. When pilots reported concerns, management responded with bonuses for successful mission completion. The November incident should have ended the program. During Flight Test 23, pilot Marcus Webb experienced complete hydraulic failure at Mach 5. 2. Only his exceptional skills and lucky atmospheric conditions prevented catastrophe. The post-flight investigation revealed systematic failures in hydraulic line manufacturing. Cost-cutting measures had replaced military spec components with commercial alternatives. Breakpoint's response was masterful in its deception. They replaced the failed components, issued an internal memo about supply chain quality control, and classified the incident report beyond standard access. Webb was offered a $500 bonus to sign a revised incident report that minimized the failure's severity. He refused and was immediately transferred to another project. Chief Financial Officer Patricia Liu's leaked emails revealed the company's true priorities. Every delayed test costs us $12 million. Every safety stand-down costs $30 million. A pilot's death costs $10 million in insurance. The math is clear. The insurance was another scandal. Breakpoint had secured policies that specifically excluded experimental phase incidents. Pilots' families would receive standard military death benefits, a fraction of what commercial aviation provided. When Pilots' Union representative Colonel James Harrison questioned this, Breakpoint's legal team reminded him that test pilots were contractors, not employees. Dr. Angela Foster, Breakpoint's former director of flight safety, fought a losing battle against institutional momentum. Her department's budget was cut 60% in the year before Hawley's death. Staff was reduced from 45 to 12. Mandatory safety reviews were reclassified as optional consultations. I was basically decorative, Dr. Foster testified. They kept me to satisfy federal requirements, but ignored everything I said. When I threatened to report violations to the FAA, they reminded me about the $15 million lawsuit they'd file for violating my NDA. The FAA itself bore responsibility. Regulatory capture, the phenomenon where industries control their regulators, was complete. FAA inspectors were former Breakpoint employees. Oversight committees included Breakpoint board members. Safety violations were negotiated like parking tickets, with fines that represented minutes of revenue. 3 months before the fatal flight, an anonymous package arrived at the Washington Post. It contained 200 pages of internal documents showing systematic safety violations, suppressed incident reports, and falsified test data. The Post's legal team, fearing litigation from a defense contractor, buried the story pending additional verification. Breakpoint's test pilot corps knew the reality but faced impossible choices. Flying meant accepting potentially fatal risks. Refusing meant ending careers and facing financial ruin from contract violation lawsuits. Most convinced themselves their skills could overcome mechanical failures. Christopher Hawley was different. He documented everything, every anomaly, every concern, every violation of protocol. His personal files, discovered after his death, contained enough evidence to bury Breakpoint Aerospace. But he never shared them, believing that his expertise could navigate dangers while protecting less experienced pilots from flying the X-2. The final safety review, before March 14, was theatre. Engineers presented concerns they knew would be ignored. Executives asked questions they didn't want answered. The review board approved the flight with 19 documented reservations, each carefully worded to avoid legal liability while acknowledging deadly risks. Jonathan Morris closed the meeting with words that would define his legacy. Gentlemen, we're not building toys. Progress requires risk. Hawley understands that. He's prepared. The X-2 is as ready as it will ever be. Morris was wrong about everything, except the last part. The X-2 was indeed as ready as it would ever be ready to kill the man who trusted it with his life. March 14 dawned, perfect for dying. Clear skies, minimal wind, optimal atmospheric conditions for hypersonic flight. Christopher Hawley arrived at Groom Lake at 500, 3 hours before scheduled takeoff. He wanted time alone with the X-2 to understand its mood, to negotiate one more successful flight with a machine that had no concept of mercy. The pre-flight inspection took 4 hours. Hawley personally checked every surface, every connection, every system he could access. Ground Crew Chief Tony Martinez noticed unusual thoroughness. Chris normally trusted our work. That morning, he verified everything personally. He spent 20 minutes just examining the engine intake, running his hands along surfaces like he was reading Braille. At 745, Hawley entered the suit room. The pressure suit, custom-fitted and worth $2.8 million, would theoretically protect him during ejection at speeds up to Mach 3. Above that, physics made survival academic. Suit technician Maria Rodriguez noticed Hawley's hands trembling slightly as she conducted final checks. "I asked if he was okay," Rodriguez recalled. "He said, 'Maria, I've got a bad feeling about this one. The bird's angry today.' I offered to report medical concerns to delay the flight. He just smiled and said, 'Can't report feelings, can you?'" Mission briefing at 815 was routine. Weather optimal, systems nominal, chase planes ready. Flight Director Sarah Morgan ran through abort scenarios, emergency procedures, contingency plans. Hawley had heard it hundreds of times, but today he asked unusual questions about structural failure protocols, about G-force limits during catastrophic deceleration, about survival windows during high-altitude breakup. In hindsight, Chris was writing his own obituary, Morgan reflected. He knew something we didn't or wouldn't admit. At 853, Hawley climbed into the X-2's cockpit. The space was cramped, more capsule than cockpit, surrounded by 147 different warning lights, 23 display screens, and controls that required perfect muscle memory at speeds where thinking meant dying. Ground control recorded his pre-flight communications. X2 Alpha ready for engine start. All systems showing green. Feeling good about today's profile. His voice was steady, professional. The lie came easily after years of practice. 911. Engine start. The scramjet's ignition sequence began a carefully orchestrated process that transformed the aircraft from expensive sculpture to barely contained explosion. Subsystems activated in sequence. Computers ran 17,000 calculations per second. The X-2 awakened. 923. Taxi clearance. The X-2 rolled toward runway 32, chase planes falling into formation. F-16s that could barely keep up at the X-2's slowest speeds, there to observe and document rather than rescue. 928. Tower, X-2 Alpha requesting takeoff clearance. X-2 Alpha, you are cleared for takeoff. Godspeed, Chris. Copy Tower, let's make history. The takeoff was perfect. The X-2 accelerated down the 3-mile runway, rotating at 210 knots, climbing steeply into Nevada's morning sky. Chase planes reported nominal ascent, all systems functioning within parameters. At 934, Hawley reached 45.0 feet and initiated scramjet transition. This was the critical moment, switching from traditional jet propulsion to scramjet operation. The process required precise speed, altitude, and angle of attack. 1 degree wrong, and the engine would fail to transition, forcing an abort. Transition complete, scramjet operating nominally, accelerating through Mach 3. The acceleration was brutal. Even with G-suits and training, hypersonic acceleration compressed human bodies against physical limits. Hawley's breathing, recorded by onboard systems, became rhythmic and forced combat breathing techniques to maintain consciousness. Mach 4 at 938, Mach 5 at 941. The X-2 climbed through 70.0 feet, entering the realm where sky becomes space, where air becomes too thin to breathe but thick enough to burn. At 943.17, everything changed. Control. I'm getting unusual harmonics from the engine. Vibration increasing through the airframe. Copy, X2 Alpha. Telemetry shows all systems within acceptable ranges. Do you want to abort? 8 seconds of silence. 8 seconds where Hawley made the decision that would kill him. Negative, control, continuing acceleration, passing through Mach 6. The vibration wasn't random, it was resonance. The scramjet had entered the exact frequency range engineers had tried to prevent through software. But atmospheric conditions at 78, 0 feet created pressure variations the ground tests never anticipated. The engine was shaking itself apart at the molecular level, 944. 3. Control, multiple warning lights, hydraulic pressure dropping, structural stress warnings. Control, X2 alpha, abort immediately, reduce speed and initiate emergency descent. Copy. Attempting to A sound like thunder interrupted Hawley's transmission. The starboard engine mount had failed. The scramjet, still producing massive thrust, was now attached by only 3 of 6 mounting points. 944, 28, starboard engine breaking away, attempting shutdown. But shutting down a scramjet at Mach 6.7 was like trying to stop a waterfall. The engine continued firing for 11 more seconds, its asymmetric thrust sending the X2 into an uncontrolled roll. 944, 41. Lost hydraulics. No control authority. Initiating emergency. The starboard wing separated, not cleanly, but in a ragged tear that sent titanium fragments through the fuselage like bullets. The cockpit pressure vessel was breached in 7 places. Hawley's suit kept him conscious, but he was now flying a disintegrating projectile at twice the speed of a rifle bullet. 944, 52. Tell Linda. The X2's main fuselage broke apart at 944, 54. The cockpit section, containing Christopher Hawley, separated and began a ballistic arc that would carry it 47 miles from the main debris field. G-forces exceeded human survivability within seconds. The capsule's emergency beacon activated at 945. 7. Transmitting location data for a pilot who was already gone. Ground radar tracked 847 individual pieces of debris. The largest, the cockpit section, impacted the desert floor at 947.23, traveling at over 400 miles per hour. Recovery teams found Hawley still strapped in his seat, his hands on controls that no longer existed, having fought to the last second to save an aircraft that had been doomed from the first. The investigation revealed what everyone already knew: systematic failures, ignored warnings, and institutional negligence had killed Christopher Hawley as surely as the X2's disintegration. But investigations don't resurrect the dead or comfort the living. Linda Hawley received the notification at 1015. She'd been expecting it for years, but preparation doesn't soften impact. She asked only one question: did he suffer? The official answer was no, that G-forces would have rendered him unconscious instantly. The truth, known only to those who heard the full 47-second recording, was different. Christopher Hawley was conscious, fighting, and terrified until the end. His final word, Linda, was clear on the recording they'd never let his family hear. The X2 program was terminated immediately. Breakpoint Aerospace declared bankruptcy within 6 months. Jonathan Morris was indicted for criminal negligence, but acquitted when key evidence was ruled inadmissible due to national security classifications. Today, Christopher Hawley's name appears on a memorial at Edwards Air Force Base, alongside other test pilots who paid the ultimate price for progress. The inscription reads, "They flew into tomorrow so others could follow safely." But Hawley's death wasn't about tomorrow. It was about today's failures, greed, and the persistent belief that expertise can overcome institutional rot. The X2 didn't kill Christopher Hawley. We did. If you found this story important, subscribe to our channel. We document disasters not for sensation, but for education, because forgetting means repeating. Like, share, and comment with your thoughts. Remember, progress without conscience is catastrophe waiting for coordinates. We'll see you in the next episode.